The 1970s marked the beginning of the computer age at FSU. Under President Marshall, whose academic background is in science education, the university begins utilizing computers as an aid to instruction. FSU is soon recognized as one of the nation's foremost centers for instructional design, the creation of new learning techniques. At the same time, the Board of Regents approves the installation of a $3 million computer, the largest in state government, setting the stage for FSU's later foray into the world of supercomputers. If there is a human equivalent to the supercomputer, it may very well be alive in Paul Dirac. As a 25-year-old British scientist, Dirac helped to establish the field of quantum mechanics, overthrowing the foundations of classical physics. Indeed, his Dirac equation, revealed in 1927, describes the behavior of an electron with almost perfect accuracy and earned him a share of the 1933 Nobel Prize in Physics.
He was at Cambridge, where he held the Lucasian Chair of Mathematics, which was the same chair that Newton had held. And they have a retirement age in England. He had to retire at age 65, and he didn't want to quit.
In 1970, already traveling in the U.S., Dirac is convinced to take a one-year visiting professorship at FSU. He is struck by the sylvan countryside of North Florida, which reminds him of England, and the good nature of the faculty at FSU.
At the end of the year, Christmas, we had a Christmas party at my house, and he was going to leave between that New Year club. And his wife came to me at my house and said, "Paul likes it here. Could you arrange something for him to come on a continuing basis rather than a visitor?" And of course, see, I had only money for this visiting business, for a semester or something like that with NSF. I didn't have money for a permanent job. And so I said, well, maybe something can be arranged.
In the field of physics, Paul Dirac is a living legend, and his presence is as if a name from the history books has come alive. As Lanuti writes later, Dirac is not a person. Dirac is an equation, a theory of antimatter.
Bob Lawton was the Dean of Arts and Sciences. And so we went to see Bob Lawton, and Bob Lawton was a Shakespeare scholar. And I remember telling him, here he doesn't know anything about who Paul Dirac is. And I said, suppose somebody told you that Shakespeare wanted to come to the university. That's about the extent of it as far as physics is concerned. Would you be interested? He said, absolutely, of course.
3 days later, FSU has an offer, beginning a 14-year relationship that does as much for Paul Dirac as it does for FSU.
In fact, he became more active here than he had been in his last years in Cambridge. In fact, his wife has told me many times, he reversed his personality. At Cambridge, he worked at home in an office, a study he had at home, and he would go in to teach his classes and then come back home and stay all the time. At FSU, did the opposite.
The period that I'm going to talk about begins in 1925.
He took students again. He started lecturing and giving courses again, and wrote more books and papers. Just rejuvenated him, and he had a grand time here.
Dirac remains at FSU until his death in 1984. Laid to rest in Tallahassee, he will forever be part of the rolling countryside that became his second home. Monuments to his FSU contributions include a science library named in his honor and a statue paid for by friends, colleagues, and admirers with whom he came in contact during his time at FSU. Back home, they also remember. In London's Westminster Abbey, a 2-foot square tablet recognizes Dirac's place in British history. It rests against the gravestone of Sir Isaac Newton. During a performance at Tully Gym, pop singer Joan Baez observes this place is amazingly hip. Her declaration is more than prophetic, for at FSU, there exists a celestial aberration of sorts, the unique alignment of a humanistic faculty cosmopolitan students, and outside agitators who target Tallahassee early and often as a regional point of protest. The result is a supernova of activism, by many accounts, a Berkeley of the South.
I think it was a little different here, in a sense that, for instance, my wife went to the University of Florida. And while there was activism at the University of Florida, it seemed like, yeah, there was activism, but if there was a good concert, maybe we'll go to the concert instead of the demonstration. So I got a sense sometimes in some of the other schools that it was a little more of, what was fashionable. And that's not to characterize everything so globally, but I think at FSU we had a very consistent movement of student activists that ranged anywhere from the very radical to people who were more liberal, anti-war type of people.
For all of America, the Vietnam War is divisive, but especially so on college campuses, where for many, higher education serves only as a refuge from the draft. Those fortunate enough to enjoy a reprieve feel a duty to protest, fueling a new culture on campus.
I was in the Army for 3 years, and I came back in 1971. I thought I'd finish up my degree in political science. Well, when I left, everybody looked like me, and they talked about these vacuous things. And when I went back, they had long hair and no shoes. There were no saddle Oxford. There were no shoes, and they were doing things like saying things like, "Well, if we're going to burn down Westcott, should we use gasoline or should we let people know ahead of time?" And dear God, this is a whole different thing.
One night after Student Government Association Senate meetings, a resolution was passed. And at that time, I was a young student senator. I think it was my first year in student government. A resolution was passed to block Tennessee Street until the war ended.
There was a significant amount of sentiment on the campus for disrupting the orderly processes of the university. There was a minority, but a significant part of the student body and the faculty who wanted to close the place down from time to time.
He arrives at FSU in 1968, known simply as Jack Daniel Lieberman. But the local chapter of Young Liberals already has a member named Jack, and someone nicknames the newcomer Radical. Over time, Radical Jack embodies the spirit of activism at FSU, living up to his infamous moniker.
I come from a liberal Jewish background. I lived when I was a child in Philadelphia in a neighborhood that had quite a number of Holocaust survivors. So I naturally had an inclination of being against injustice, of being against racism. So my whole background, from my Jewish influences, from my beliefs in American democracy, led me to believe that if you had ideals, you had to fight for them, because if you didn't, very bad things could happen.
Monday, May 4, 1970. A single event crystallizes the anti-war protest. It is known as Kent State. The Ohio killings sparked protest on many college campuses across America, and in some areas there is violence. At FSU, Governor Claude Kirk seeks to diffuse tensions himself. He brings a rocking chair from the governor's mansion to Landis Green, where he sits and talks into the night with students. But the peace lasts less than 2 weeks. At Jackson State College in Mississippi, police shoot and kill a pair of students, a tragedy that moves some universities to cancel classes for the remainder of the semester. At FSU, students make a similar request of President Marshall, who calls a meeting of the Faculty Senate. Word of the meeting spreads quickly, and when Marshall walks into Ruby Diamond Auditorium, he finds standing room only.
When I walked down front, faced the audience, faced the auditorium to open the meeting, I saw hanging from the balcony a Viet Cong flag. And I had to decide, do I conduct this meeting of the Florida State University, an official body of the university, which in turn is an officially a function of the taxpayers of Florida? Do I conduct this meeting in the presence of that flag of our enemy? Or do I take some other action? I turned and faced the auditorium and saw that Viet Cong flag hanging there. And I said, I can't do this. I just cannot do this. So I said, I give those of you who are holding that flag 3 minutes in which to remove it. And I would appreciate your doing that. And silence reigned, and all the heads downstairs turned and faced the flag, and a minute or so went by, and slowly one hand began to turn, and then the other one began to turn, and they rolled the flag up and removed it, and we went on with the meeting. What would have happened if they hadn't removed it is hard to say. I probably would have adjourned the meeting and tried to leave the auditorium. But we were on the edge of violence many times in that period.
For Radical Jack, maintaining the right to protest becomes as large an issue as the war itself. His confrontations with FSU administration center on free speech and the First Amendment. Against university policy, he takes over an unused classroom in the Bellamy Building to teach a course called How to Make Revolution in the USA. Although a student court says Lieberman's actions are not in violation of the student code, President Marshall expels him from the university. More than a quarter century has passed, and in many ways, Jack Lieberman has become one of the people he warned us about.
Yes, any calls for me?
A true capitalist. He is owner of a computer supply store in Miami that, by his own admission, will keep his family well off. On the walls of his office, there is no mention of a radical Jack. Today, he's only Coach Lieberman. And although he still works on behalf of many causes, his once blind passion is viewed with a new light.
I've learned that many times it's you get a lot more with honey than vinegar. And sometimes you have to compromise on secondary things in order to reach more substantial goals. And at that time, it was more of an all-or-nothing approach, which is probably typical of youth in a lot of ways. So again, I don't think it's unique for me.
The cause is a distant memory now, but the sacrifice is not forgotten. On the FSU campus, the Army ROTC building that students once threatened to burn to the ground is now home to a memorial for 10 ROTC graduates who lost their lives in the Vietnam War. For some, it is a reminder of a time and a place unique in the university experience, a window to look back and reflect on lessons learned.
But I think as much as anything, we all kind of look, well, did you sell out? You know, was it just talk? And surprisingly, as a lot of people who would want to be cynics about it, a lot of people have carried those ideals into their adulthood, into midlife. Yes, they're more comfortable than they were at the time, and yes, they're probably more comfortable than their parents were, but still there's a sense of social awareness and social conscience.
In 1971, FSU's impact on state politics takes a dramatic leap when Reuben Askew is elected governor.
I think that it's time to put aside a lot of personal differences and start working in the interest of the people of Florida.
The 1951 graduate serves 2 terms in office, winning acclaim from a Harvard University study as one of the 10 best U.S. governors of the 20th century. In 1988, Askew is named FSU's Alumnus of the Century.
It was an overwhelming thing because it covers the length of Florida State College for Women, and Florida State University. To become the outstanding alumnus of the century, it was a big thing to me, and it still is, and one of the times I've really been humbled at receiving it.
Askew becomes the only living person to have an academic school at FSU named in his honor. He returns each week to lecture in the School of Public Administration that bears his name. Buoyed by the openness of the late 60s peace movement, individual freedoms blossom on the college campus. Dorm visitation policies are softened, allowing men and women to meet in on-campus housing. Citing moral decadence, a member of the State Board of Regents is outraged. Elizabeth Kovakovich incites a statewide debate, calling the university dorms taxpayer whorehouses. Pressured by the Florida Senate, universities reconsider dorm visitation policies and students respond with protest, mostly in jest. But the message from the establishment is clear. The sexual revolution is to the 70s what communism was to the 50s, and it's a difficult time to be a university chaplain.
I really went through the sweat box on sexually related issues. I was at one time chairman and coordinator for the clergy consultation service on problem pregnancies. Now, you have to understand that there was not only an anti-abortion law on the books in Florida, but there was also obviously a constitutionally contaminated statute that said that anybody who gave information to anyone as to where they could procure a legal abortion was violating the criminal law code. So if a chaplain or a counselor told a couple where they could procure a legal abortion in New York or wherever, they were subject to arrest and criminal prosecution.
On at least 3 occasions, Sandin is the subject of a grand jury investigation.
Many times on Friday afternoons at the end of the week, I'd see a patrol car pulling up in front of Bryan Hall where my office was, and kind of wondering whether or not somebody was going to step out of that patrol car. You know, the grand juries would always quit their work on Friday afternoons. I was always wondering, you know, if they might be stepping in there and indicting me and arresting me for problem pregnancy counseling.
The flap over dorm policies proves not as serious. By the fall of 1971, co-ed visitation is reinstated. In 1972, Tully Gymnasium is suddenly home to one of the hottest tickets in college basketball. Under Coach Hugh Durham, the Seminoles advance all the way to the championship game of the NCAA Final Four, losing to Bill Walton and UCLA. It remains the pinnacle of success for Seminole basketball. In 1973, ill health forces English professor Mike Shera to resign his position. He has taught creative writing at FSU for 14 years, all the while nurturing his own literary career. A year after his retirement from FSU, Shera publishes a Civil War epic titled The Killer Angels. It wins him the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. The Marching Chiefs make international dues on a 1974 goodwill trip to Syria and Jordan as the first band to ever be sponsored by the U.S. State Department. Jordan's King Hussein is so moved by the performances, a year later he travels to Tallahassee, where he receives an honorary degree from FSU. In 1974, FSU's fledgling law school sprouts its wings with a $1.3 million building dedicated by U.S. Supreme Court Justice and former football star Byron Whizzer White. Football is the subject of a movie called The Longest Yard, starring former FSU student Burt Reynolds. In October of 1974, the movie premieres at the Florida Theater in Tallahassee, a tribute to Reynolds, who starred as a Seminole halfback in the mid-1950s. Although an injury forces an end to his athletic career and college plans, Reynolds is endeared to the school of his youth. 5 years after The Longest Yard premiere, he is Hollywood's #1 box office attraction, and donates money for creation of the first eminent scholar chair in state history. The Burt Reynolds Chair in Theater is worth $1 million and quickly becomes the most prominent visiting professorship in theater education.
And by virtue of the authority vested in me by the State Board of Education and the Board of Regents.
In 1981, Reynolds finally receives his FSU diploma and honorary doctorate in humane letters.
I'm so touched to have this honor. I'm noted for being rather, I don't know what the word is, but I know what they call it, irreverent about these kind of things. I'm not irreverent about this. I thank you, I thank God, and most of all, I want you to know that it's an overly used word, but I will love this university for the rest of my life, and I will love everyone connected with it, and I will try to make you proud of me. Thank you.
Football fortunes have altered dramatically since Reynolds' heyday. The Seminoles go one season without winning a single game, and the national poll ranks the FSU program among the bottom 10. But the university's self-esteem soon rises from the ashes. A new phenomenon appears on the college landscape, and some credit its origins to Florida State.
There was also another poll. It was a streaking poll. There was a streaking poll that came out every week. And we stayed atop the streaking poll for, I guess, probably about a month. We were number one in streaking. And
Without warning, a St. Louis radio station drops FSU to number 2 in the national rankings. It is March of 1974, and a full moon beckons an estimated 800 FSU students who rally to reclaim the ranking.
And I turned around, and when I turned around, I looked down Jefferson Street, and here was this wave of naked people running at me down Jefferson Street, and in front was this really grim-faced woman, and she had on shoes and nothing else. She was not even wearing a smile. My first thought was, why are they running at me? What do hundreds of naked people want with me?
Families would go get their chicken boxes and come out and with their kids and sit on the car fenders around the green out there and have dinner and watch the streaking going on. I mean, it became a sort of a community event. Sort of a cheap entertainment for the evening, go out and watch the streaking. But then we began to see a different element moving in, the criminal element moving in.
On the third consecutive night of uncontested streaking, sheriff's deputies arrest 20 students, and the university takes a strong stance against future flashings. Aside from a brief reappearance on the one-year anniversary of the fateful night, streaking is reduced to a fanciful footnote in FSU lore. In many ways, the streaking phenomenon characterizes Stan Marshall's reign as president. From war protests to women's liberation and drug experimentation, Marshall endures the most tumultuous period in higher education. His challengers include black students, feeling isolated and ignored, who take over his office in the Westcott building. Marshall responds with landmark affirmative action initiatives, including the state's first black student union.
It wasn't so difficult to make decisions then, because you had a pretty good idea of what should be done, the difference between right and wrong in terms of administration. Carrying them out, though, was another question. That was much tougher.
In March of 1976, saying 8 years is long enough, Marshall submits his resignation.
I've often said it was a very challenging time, but a very interesting time. There was more tumult more chaos on the campus than at any time before or since, I suppose. But, you know, you had a feeling you were sort of part of history. The changes that were taking place on the American university in those days have made gigantic changes in the culture in which we live. And, you know, I was a part of that. For good or ill, I was a part of that.
For truly this institution today has achieved its place in the sun.
July 1976. While America revels in the afterglow of a bicentennial celebration, it's also reaching out to a new world. 60 million kilometers from Earth, the Viking lander touches down on the surface of Mars, beaming back the first pictures of the red planet. Included in the transmission is the first Martian weather report. Light winds from the east in the late afternoon, broadcast FSU Professor Seymour Hess, changing to light winds from the southwest after midnight. An FSU professor of meteorology, Hess is instrumental in designing the weather monitoring equipment aboard Viking and is accorded the honor of announcing the first report from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California.
Our best people are not leaving Florida State. Some.
Executive Vice President Bernard Sliger served 7 months as interim president before earning the job outright in February of 1977. An economist, he is well suited to tackle a third consecutive year of budget cutbacks.
Both of whom went to University of Houston for kinds of money that would be difficult for anybody to keep.
But whatever the problem, the FSU family soon finds comfort in the common man with an uncommon touch.
The students loved him because they saw him. And, you know, as he was walking to or from work.
One of the things that I did is I walked, because I don't drive. I walked to school every day and walked home every night. And I met a lot of students that way.
They'd visit with him, and he would go out of his way to go by the swimming pool or come by the Union, and he occasionally would just poke his head into a student government meeting and, you know, no agenda, just wanted to see what was going on.
Sliger's connection to students is more than accidental. In the backyard of his home, he begins an annual rite of spring. The entire student body is invited to the President's Ice Cream Social.
And when I meet students today, of course I meet a lot of students that were here in 15-some years, they tell me I came to your ice cream social. I don't think a lot of them came because there couldn't have been that many that came who tell me they came.
In a field where academic titles such as doctor, dean, and president are hard-earned and closely guarded, Sliger gains the ultimate compliment on campus. Everyone calls him Bernie. Although Sliger will face many tough decisions as president, one of them is already made for him. Before leaving office, Stan Marshall completes the hiring of a new football coach, Bobby Bowden.
I believe in discipline. I definitely believe in discipline. There are so many degrees of it. I guess my feeling on discipline is like if I can copy somebody, which is about all I do, is holding a bird in your hand. If you hold it too tight, you'll squeeze it to death, and if you hold it too lightly, it'll get away. So I believe in discipline. But there's a just right that you got to have, and that's what I'm gonna have.
As Bowden arrives, there is no guarantee of success. The best ticket in the stadium runs all of $7, and the coach's salary is a modest $38,000 a year. There is much work to be done.
Well, I tell you, we really struggled with our coaching show in the early years. When I came here, we only had 4 towns. We had Pensacola, Panama City, Tallahassee, Florida, and Jacksonville, and that was it. I mean, people in Miami didn't know Florida State University, didn't know Bobby Bowden, you know.
This past week, we played in our 3rd straight homecoming game on the road.
I can remember the days where I did the whole show myself. You know, I did the commercials. I did the "We'll be back in a minute." I didn't have anybody else, you know.
You'll see the highlights of the Florida State-Auburn football game.
Back in those days, we would have to film the show, And then we'd have to get that film and get it to those cities that we were trying to get to, you know. And we had runners, guys that would get in the car and drive it to Jacksonville and drive it to Panama City. And I remember one Sunday morning after a ball game, I finished the show. I probably got up about 5 and did the show at 6. And we had no way to get it to Panama City, so I had to get in my car. I think Ann and I drove over to Panama City and delivered. It had to be there by 9 o'clock so they could put it on the air.
In 4 years, Bowden achieved the unthinkable, leading FSU to a perfect 11-0 record and its first New Year's Day bowl game.
Coach Bowden, through his abilities and the coaching staff and his ability to attract players, has made our program much better. But as far as the administration playing a role in it, I would like to take credit for it, but I can't take any credit for it. The only thing I take credit for is I left them alone.
On campus, the emotional fallout is palatable, and the irony all too clear. A campus divided as the decade begins now rallies together with collective pride.
When our football team comes out to warm up for the game and the student side is already packed, now that fires you up. And I know you will do that Saturday night, and I want you to know we thank you and we appreciate it.
In 1978, the tradition of Seminole football takes on a new look. In a game against Oklahoma State, FSU fans get their first glimpse of a horse and rider whose images will soon become synonymous with the university.
When Coach Bowden came back to Florida State, as everybody knows, he had been here before as an assistant coach under Coach Peterson. When he came back, I happened to be visiting as friends with he and Ann at their home in Killearn one evening, and he said, "Bill, we need to do something to get really tradition here at Florida State." He said, "You know, it's like we got to get people wearing garnet and gold. We got to get people just really wearing our colors." And back when I was here before, you know, they used to have a guy that when the football team came out on the field, he'd turn backflips down the field, and what was his name? They called him Sammy Seminole. He said, "Well, that's the kind of thing." And he went on to ask, "Well, what happened to that?" And so I'm really not sure. But he said, "Well, we need to do something like that." And I said, "Well, I got this idea that I've had back since I was a young student at FSU." And so I told him of the idea. And the more I talked about it, the more Coach Bowden became excited. And he said, "Bill, would you see that happens?" And I said, "Well, I will. I really think it's something that'll work." I said, "But you've got to loan me Ann." Ann being so vivacious and so beautiful a person, I knew that as the wife of the football coach, she could help open some doors that I anticipated would not be open for us. And that was quite true. We ran into all different types of reasons why it would not work and why you couldn't have a livestock animal on state property. I mean, we could go on and on. Our first time we ever came out to practice, they wouldn't let us on the field. I mean, went through these whole kind of deals.
The quest to ride as Chief Osceola becomes as legendary as the warrior himself. Applicants must have a 3.0 grade average, spend an apprenticeship of 2 years, and be of unimpeachable character.
I wanted to make sure that we had the blessing of the Seminole Indians, and I was very sensitive that we try to do it culturally authentic as possible. So I went and met with Chief Howard Tommy of the Seminole Indian tribe, told him what I wished to do. I knew that one of the first objections would be, well, Seminole Indians didn't ride horses because of all the artwork they see of Seminoles in dugout canoes. He went to share with me how that they were great horsemen back from their Creek heritage, but most of their livestock was stolen. And he thought it was a splendid idea.
Chief Osceola and Renegade create a tradition without equal in college athletics, symbolic of the Seminole spirit that is pervasive on the Florida State University campus. The success of the football program generates national interest in FSU, and applications for admission skyrocket. Bernie Sliger's presidency is hitting full stride as he sets his sights on the final missing piece of the university's academic framework, a college of engineering.
In economics, that's where I got started. In economics, the best students were engineering students. In economics, they'd come over and take economics, and they knew math, and they knew that, and so the best students were always engineering students. Well, I thought, hell, we don't have any engineering students. We don't have any of these good students.
Less than a decade earlier, a lack of cost effectiveness forces FSU to close its small school of engineering science. And the resurrection as a traditional engineering college is not without controversy. A consultant recommends enhancing existing state programs rather than starting a new one. But Sliger is resolute, developing a plan to jointly operate a new engineering school with Florida A&M University. In the fall of 1982, 100 students began study in 4 engineering disciplines: electrical, mechanical, chemical, and civil. Within 6 years, a 76,000 square foot building is opened, and by the turn of the century, its size will double. In 1982, Florida State's landlocked campus inherits 2,000 square feet of waterfront when the legislature transfers the Panama City Center of the University of West Florida to FSU.
On behalf of the Board of Regents of the State University System of Florida and of the people of the state of Florida, I accept this Dempsey J. Barron building and this campus, and I deliver it to the Florida State University with the hope and the confidence that this campus will be used to nurture and develop the fiercely independent thought that Senator Barron has exemplified throughout his career.
The 30-acre campus is home to just 600 students and 11 faculty and staff. But $7 million is appropriated for new buildings, and FSU begins transporting Tallahassee faculty for a rapidly expanding curriculum. In 1997, the branch campus offers 23 undergraduate and master's degree programs.
Do everything, dance, sing, and so forth. Grab him sometimes and hold him. Say, how can you do
In 1985, the School of Theater gains worldwide attention when New York theater producer Joseph Papp takes on a teaching role as resident master of the Hoffman Eminent Scholar Chair. At 64, he is the most important force in American theater, producer of A Chorus Line, the longest-running show in Broadway history.
Using language. Using it.
For parts of the fall and spring semester, students are treated to workshops in acting, directing, and creative auditioning, and visits from Papp protégés such as acclaimed actor Raul Julia. Whether in the arts or sciences, accomplishments at FSU are no longer measured by their regional reputations, but rather their global impact. By 1986, the university is more than 3 years into a project to enhance research by increasing computer capability. The Supercomputations Research Institute, known as SCREE, utilizes cooperative agreements with private industry to build a stable of the fastest computers in the world. When the ETA-10 is delivered in 1986, it is the most powerful computer on the face of the earth, attracting users from all corners of the scientific world. Of course, FSU has been on the international science map since the 1960 emergence of the Tandem Van de Graaff Nuclear Accelerator Laboratory. Nearly 3 decades later, the venerable laboratory is still going strong, one of only 4 nuclear accelerator laboratories still operating on a university campus. In 1986, a third upgrade adds a superconducting linear accelerator to the Van de Graaff, more than doubling its energy. At the dedication ceremony, Leroy Collins, who was governor of Florida when the laboratory first came online, gives the ceremonial command to restart the accelerator.
Start the accelerator.
Since the early 1940s, when Johnny Weissmuller came to Wakulla Springs to film Tarzan, Florida has been quietly growing as a force in the motion picture industry. By the mid-'80s, Hollywood studios find business practices in Florida as friendly as the skies, and movie productions are impacting the state's economy to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. State leaders want to retain that film business and attract even more, but there's a lack of trained professionals. In 1987, the legislature establishes at FSU the School of Motion Picture, Television, and Recording Arts, only the 7th film school in the nation and the first new program since the 1960s.
This is scene 33, shot Havel, take 1.
Within 2 years, classes are underway, and in 1990, Ray Fielding is hired as dean. Recognized as an expert in film history and visual effects, Fielding's academic career was forged at the University of Southern California and UCLA, where he spawned the careers of industry giants including Francis Ford Coppola.
Roll sound!
Within the first 7 years of operation, FSU's film school is recognized as one of the top 10 in the nation. And by 1997, student productions rack up more than 350 awards and prizes at national and international film festivals. January 1989, Dr. Bobby Leach dies at the age of 53. For 10 years, he serves as Vice President of Student Affairs, the highest-ranking black administrator in FSU history. But his legacy, his tireless work on behalf of students, is measured not by his race, but rather his record.
If he was the lowest black, if he was a janitor, if he was a secretary, if he was just temporary employee of Florida State University, the people that he would have been able to attract, he would have had an impact on their lives. The position only gave him the access to touch to touch them in numbers. And I think that's the greatest part of having someone like that in a position like that. He made particularly African Americans on this campus so proud, you know, to say that I attend a university who there's somebody who's just like me, who's right up there with the president. That's a great feeling.
6 months after his death, state leaders named the university's new recreation center after Leach. The $12 million facility is testament to Leach's commitment to students. And in 1993, the complex is named one of the world's top sports facilities. As the final decade of the 20th century arrives, Florida State University finds itself bursting at the seams. With only 378 acres, FSU has long been the smallest campus in the state university system. So, embracing a theme from wagon trails of another century, campus growth has only one way to head: west.
Literally, I was finding myself fighting with the university almost on a daily basis to keep them from building buildings out on at our site where our stadium was, because, as you know, parking is a real premium, it's a real big asset on game day. So we started turning those ideas in our mind, and we said, look, is there a way that we could accommodate what they want, which is to be able to build buildings, and, you know, in a way that we can also accomplish some of our own goals.
Around Doak Campbell Stadium, planners find approximately 36 acres of parking lot space. Architects draw plans to build up and out, wrapping the stadium in a $100 million university center, which arrives at a most opportune moment in time. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is Thomas Kent Wetherell, a former football star for the Seminoles who earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD from Florida State University.
Actually, it's something I'd seen 30 years ago. The first time I ever heard of the University Center was when Cole Moore and Mode Stone were on the athletic board, and it was back in the early 60s. And when we were playing ball, we came in one day from football practice, and Cole and Mode were standing out there and said, you know, it's a shame we don't use this facility more.
The project is bold. At 9 stories and 620,000 square feet of space, it will be the largest all-brick structure in the Southeast and the largest academic building in Florida. Part of the project is related to Seminole Boosters, who will add 20,000 seats to the stadium and skyboxes above the academic structures.
The Boosters floated a bond issue for $55 million. Prior to that time, we felt like we had to show good faith to the legislature that we were willing to raise private dollars to help make it go. And we raised $10 million using a group called the A-Team.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, the House to adjourn. Sine die.
The project is so massive, it cannot be funded in a single legislative session. Rather, it will take 3. But the university's good fortune has only begun. Wetherell's 2-year term as Speaker of the House is followed by yet another FSU graduate, Bo Johnson. Construction begins in 1991, and Seminoles in the legislature take great pride, if not pleasure, in the political clout the university has finally achieved.
I was one of the lead Republicans on education, and Ron Saunders was the appropriations chair, and he was an ardent Gator. And I know it used to just burn him up when TK and I would walk in and say, we need just a few more million in order to finish off the stadium. Well, there was a whole bunch of Gator heat at the time about how we were using the money and whatever. TK, bless his heart, who's just jokes about everything, said, well, yeah, we do need to show some fairness. We are going to have some orange and blue in our stadium. We have ordered a whole bank of orange and blue urinals that we're going to install, as soon as the thing, didn't mean it, of course, and Ron just absolutely just went, absolutely pale with the comment.
It takes many years to complete, but when the University Center opens its doors in 1995, it is immediately a vibrant center of activity, home to scores of academic and administrative offices. The first name to go up on the building belongs to the alumnus who helped navigate through state government the bulk of its funding.
There were some people who said it would never happen, and you kind of like to point out and say, well, there it is, it did happen. I don't think the University Center's done yet. I think there's still more to be done over there.
It was a project of need. It made sense. It was a perfect example of private-public partnership in the truest sense, and it was just it was a slam dunk. It was a winner.
At the same time FSU is pitching the University Center project, another is dropped literally on its doorstep.
Dr. Jack Crow had come to me just before Christmas with an idea that Florida could compete for a national laboratory. Well, first of all, I thought Jack might have been crazy because it was a wild idea that we could compete for a national laboratory. There hadn't been any national laboratories established or new ones in America in over 25 years.
In this kind of science, magnetic fields are created inside stacks of copper plates, fields that allow scientists to manipulate the tiniest particles of matter. For the last 2 decades, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has been the home to the National Science Foundation's High Magnetic Field Laboratory. NSF is looking to take the program in a new direction. But the state of Florida doesn't learn of the possibilities until the final week of the legislative session. The Sunshine State Plan extends to the west, drawing expertise from New Mexico's famous Los Alamos National Lab, partnering with FSU in Tallahassee and the University of Florida in Gainesville. The scope of the project has such broad appeal to the state, legislators need just 4 days to commit $30 million. The science world is thrown for a loop when the NSF announces it is moving the lab from MIT. But the man who signs off on the deal has a ready answer when asked if it's a risk in moving to the upstart Sunshine State.
So risk would probably have been not to put it into this facility and with the people that had the ideas that made it what it is. That might have been a bigger risk.
At Innovation Park, a stone's throw from the university's new engineering school, the National High Magnetic Field Laboratory becomes a beacon for science in the Sunshine State. The NSF's first grant of $66 million is backed up by another for $87.5 million, a contract that will fund the lab into the new century. The promise of luring great scientists is confirmed when Dr. Robert Schrieffer, winner of the 1972 Nobel Prize in Physics, comes aboard as the lab's chief scientist. He is the 5th Nobel laureate to join the FSU faculty. In addition to traditional science, the lab gains unique attention from Michael Davidson's photographs of the amazing vistas of crystallized substances. They are everyday items such as vitamins and beer, and quite spectacular when applied as designs for a new line of neckwear. A scientific and commercial success, Davidson's work brings FSU international attention. In the fall of 1994, fanfare unfolds under pristine skies as the Magnet Lab is dedicated by the Vice President of the United States.
We, along with the world, await the results of your important work, and I predict confidently that for years and years to come, scientific headlines and bulletins around the world will be datelined Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Commissioner Corrigan, it is with great pleasure that I accept on behalf of Florida State University your invitation to become a member of the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Bernie Sliger calls it one of the most difficult decisions of his presidency. Since inception of an athletic program, the Seminoles have longed for a home in the Southeastern Conference, and more than once the SEC turns them away. Sliger, who spent 19 years at a Southeastern Conference school, prefers a return to his roots. But two factors swing momentum in favor of the ACC: more money and lobbying from FSU faculty.
People don't realize the role that faculty played, or played with me anyway. And the faculty wanted to go in the ACC because so many of them had been gone to ACC schools. They hadn't gone to SEC schools. And so they prevailed upon me.
One of Sliger's toughest decisions is also one of his last. 3 days after the ACC announcement, Sliger says he will step down from the presidency in August of 1991.
I charge you in accepting this office to dedicate yourself wholeheartedly and unreservedly to those ideals for which this university stands.
For all his accomplishments, and there are many, Sliger is most proud of his ability to get along with faculty and students. The common man with an uncommon touch.
When I became alumni director, Bernie and I traveled all over the country, all over the state. People loved Bernie Sliger. We'd be going down the road and somebody'd pass us, and then they'd see it was Sliger in the car and they'd drop back, and then there'd be a sign in the windows we went by, "Hi Bernie." There's all kinds of stories like that. They're true stories.
Even though I think he was eccentric in some ways, I always thought that he was very, very together, and probably the smartest. When the 9 university presidents would get together, he never missed an issue, and he always got what he wanted for FSU.
The rigors of the office extract a toll from the modern-day president. Sliger's 15 years at the helm may pale in comparison to Edward Conradi. who reigned over the Florida State College for Women from 1909 to 1941. But other numbers are more telling. For Sliger, in just 1 year, could graduate more students than Conrady did in all 32 years of his presidency.
If I could have had a sabbatical and come back, I may have. But you couldn't get that. You'd only get a sabbatical if you left. So, but if I could have had a sabbatical, I may have stayed. But I needed a rest.
Good work, folks. That's the toast. Good work.
In January of 1991, there is celebration in the 7th floor lab of the Dittmer Chemistry Building. Professor Robert Holton has found a way to produce in the laboratory a promising cancer-fighting drug that's in short supply. Until now, it takes bark from 12,000 Pacific yew trees to produce just 2.5 pounds of Taxol, a promising ovarian cancer drug. But Holton's process joins the drug's 2 chemical fragments in the lab. Within 4 months, the university is granted U.S. patent number 5015744. A pharmaceutical company contracts with FSU for rights to the Taxol process, paying more than $30 million over the first 3 years. The university now ranks 7th nationally in revenues from patent royalties, just ahead of Harvard and the University of Florida. After 3 months of searching, Dale Lick is hired as the institution's 11th chief executive.
I accept the presidency of Florida State University with a deep sense of humility, responsibility, challenge, and enthusiasm. I accept also the charge laid upon me. I pledge myself to support every responsible, dedicated effort towards the search, discovery, dissemination, and preservation of truth. I am confident that with the support, assistance, and encouragement of our students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, citizens, and friends, the Florida State University will use its distinguished tradition as a sound base upon which to build an equally distinguished future.
But following in the footsteps of Sliger is no easy task. Just 2 years after taking the job, Lick makes himself available for the presidency of his alma mater, Michigan State. Although he withdraws his name from consideration, some factions of the FSU community are greatly concerned. The unrest does not subside, and in August of 1993, Lick resigns.
Obviously, it is personally painful and difficult for me to leave the presidency. Controversy surrounding myself as an individual, however, cannot be allowed to hinder progress for Florida State University. While I'm disappointed that I will no longer be able to lead all of its efforts, I am pleased that I will remain at Florida State University in a faculty position and continue to contribute to its future.
Suddenly, without a president, the university has only one place to turn: back to the future. Behind the scenes, Sliger has nurtured and encouraged a successful football program. It seems nothing, if not fateful, that he would be back in the presidency for the 1993 season. The Seminoles' rise to excellence is underscored by a preseason #1 ranking. However, 10 games into the schedule, FSU tumbles from the summit after a heartbreaking loss at Notre Dame. But this is the fateful season. Even a stroke, which Sliger suffers during open-heart surgery, cannot deny the Florida State destiny.
And it seemed to me like we were going to win the national championship. It's just something that came out of that stroke. I don't know why. But I just thought we were going to win the national championship. I couldn't see any reason not to. Whereas other years, we had better teams maybe, or just as good teams, and we never won it. But it just seemed to me, so then we got beat by Notre Dame. I thought, well, we're still going to win it.
A week after upsetting FSU, Notre Dame stumbles in a dramatic upset of its own, allowing FSU back in the title race. The final regular season game finds the Seminoles battling their arch rivals, the Florida Gators. In the waning moments of the game, quarterback Charlie Ward finds his freshman roommate running back Warrick Dunn, who races 79 yards for the game-winning score.
Up by Dunn. He's got the first down to the 40, down to the 50, down the sideline to the 40, down to the 30. He separates. He's to the 20, to the 10, to the 5. Touchdown, Florida State. Warrick Dunn on third down. Unbelievable.
2 weeks later, Ward becomes the first Seminole to win the Heisman Trophy, symbolic of the nation's top collegiate football player. Then on January the 1st, just 46 years after the program began, FSU defeats Nebraska in the Orange Bowl, a victory that earns the Seminoles the national championship.
It's a sense of pride, I think, for the university. It's a sense of pride, I think, for graduates of Florida State University, alumni down through the years. That can be recognized that 1993, their university had the ingredients, had all of the parts that put together, which starts to me at the very top, from the president down to the lowest, last student. The formula put together won a national championship.
Prior to the end of the season, the university finds its new president, former dean of the FSU Law School, Talbot Sandy Dallenbert, whose mother once attended the Florida State College for Women. But Dallenbert is not the president of record for the long-awaited championship.
My appointment papers originally said that I would take office on January 1st, and of course we were playing for the national championship in the Orange Bowl against Nebraska, and so I said I'd just take office the next day, and that way Bernie could be president when we played for the national championship. Bernie had really cared about the program for a long time and put a lot of energy into that, and he and Coach Bowden had been together for a long time. I just thought that was an appropriate thing to do. I've kidded him since and said that, as you may recall, that the game lasted until after midnight, so actually it really was my championship anyhow, but Bernie really deserved to be president when we won the national championship.
In Tallahassee, a parade awaits the champions. In the motorcade, Dallenbert elects to drive the presidential car. Bernie Sliger is in the back seat, riding high. Four months into office, Dallenbert receives extraordinary news. FSU is classified by the Carnegie Foundation as a Research 1 institution. Only 2.5% of American universities and colleges enjoy the distinction, a classification based on the annual number of doctoral degrees granted and the federal research dollars generated. FSU is one of only 7 institutions to earn the Research 1 designation without a medical school. It is a day of crowning achievement for all those who began the university's graduate and research efforts, nearly a half century earlier.
We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and...
January 1996. An early morning launch of America's space shuttle carries into orbit FSU's second astronaut. Winston Scott is a 1972 graduate in music education who one night becomes intrigued by a roommate's homework assignment and then follows in his footsteps as an engineer. 22 years later, Scott is walking in space, only the second African American to do so.
Atlantis, Houston, good morning.
Good morning, Houston. Thanks for the great music.
Back on Earth, FSU's first astronaut, Norm Thagard, is retiring from NASA after nearly 18 years of service. The university has named its Student Health Center after the engineer, fighter pilot, and medical doctor, and Thigart returns the favor. He comes back to FSU as holder of the Bernard Schleiger Eminent Scholar Chair, teaching in the College of Engineering.
And assume we did that.
Well, anyway, let's have a toast. Let's have a toast to a successful campaign.
It is almost 1997, and the university has one major announcement before turning attention to its 50th anniversary.
From top to bottom.
The capital campaign, called an investment in learning, has reached its goal of $200 million and extends the challenge another $50 million. In just a few years, the campaign has recorded more than 150,000 individual gifts, creating 33 eminent scholar chairs, 30 professorships, and more than 200 scholarships. It is a sign that FSU has arrived to a point where loyal alumni in corporate America are investing in the future of the institution, providing the extra resources that will assure Florida State University success over the next half-century.
We've had success far beyond what I ever thought we could do. And now I must say it's actually fun to go out and ask for money for Florida State University. And I think a lot of the deans and faculty, alumni also feel that. And so I think we've changed the culture. And the culture now is one that recognizes that we have to raise private dollars to make this a great university.
The Capital Campaign puts a stamp of approval on all the achievements FSU enjoys since 1947, setting the stage for a dramatic celebration of the first 50 years. 10 days of gold.
On May 7, 1947, Governor Millard Caldwell signed into law the act that reinstated co-education in the state of Florida, which probably was a relief for the co-eds, and changed the Florida State College for Women to the Florida State University. Today, we begin to celebrate 50 years of FSU.
And with that, Secretary Borthon lights the 3 torches symbolic of those featured on the FSU seal.
Virus, representing strength of all kinds, physical, moral, and intellectual. Senator Williams. Artists, that which we acquire, knowledge which transcends skills, the appreciation of beauty. Representative Lawson. And Morris, customs, character, and tradition. Representative Gay. Through these 3 ideals, the student is educated physically, mentally, and morally.
The first torchbearers are FSU alumni currently serving in the Florida legislature. Before the 0.8 of a mile trek to Westcott is complete, the torches will pass between more than 20 hands, many former student body presidents. Serenaded by the university's pep band and led by the police and sheriff's escort, the procession turns on College Avenue, headed for campus. The trip from the Capitol to Westcott is supposed to take more than half an hour, but with adrenaline pumping, the torchbearers need just 15.
And then when Governor Askew says, which one of these torches, who has the torch that stands for mores? And I said, I do. So I got to pass my name.
From the Westcott gates, it's only a short walk to the steps of the university's administration building, where the torches make their final transition.
We will now ask Ms. Martha Jane Brown Rutland to pass the first torch to class of 1947 President Dr. Sarah Lewis Markson. The second torch will now be passed by Mr. Sean Pittman to class of 1997 President Ms. Ginger Sharrock. And now, Governor Reuben Askew will pass our final torch to FSU President Sandy Dallenberg.
Thank you, Governor. On behalf of the staff, the faculty, the students, the alumni of Florida State University, I'm happy to accept this torch and pledge for all of us that we will continue the great traditions of Florida State College for Women and the great progress and advancement that we've made at Florida State University in this last 50 years.
Secretary Mortham also made the trip from the Capitol to Westcott, where she presided over two events: the presentation of the 1905 diploma belonging to heroine alumnus Ruby Diamond, and the official designation of the Westcott property as the oldest continuous site of higher education in Florida.
It's right here.
Secretary Mortham, thank you very much. This is indeed a historic site. We are told that Thomas Jefferson's grandson, Francis Epps, had picked this site out, and he picked it out in a place that was called Gallows Hill. I think this is where they held the hangings. We don't think about that much except at exam time around here. But we do very much appreciate the old tradition that brought us forward to 50 years ago and the great things that happened on this campus well before 1947. And this historic marker will always be a monument to that great success.
From a designation that dates the campus to 1851 to an event that will take it to the year 2047, FSU's own astronauts, Dr. Norm Thagard and Navy Captain Winston Scott, participating in the burial of a time capsule to be opened on the university's 100th anniversary.
At this time, I would like to ask our past presidents of the university to step forward. Each president will ring the FSCW bell in honor of each of the 5 decades of being Florida State University. First, past President John Champion. President Stanley Marshall. President Bernie Sliger. President Dale Lick. And now President Dallenberg will ring the bell in honor of President Gordon Blackwell, who was unable to join us today.
"50 years ago, we started playing football again, but we didn't have a fight song. One day, Dr. Tommy Wright, a music professor who's still on our faculty at Florida State, saw the words to a poem in the newspaper and decided to put the words to music. The poem was written by then student, FSU student, Doug Alley. Those words and music still live today as our FSU fight song. Dr. Wright could not be with us today, but please let's welcome Mr. Doug Alley.
I'd appreciate it if I could hear that fight song one more time.
Fight, 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 oh FSU, you got the scout from Seminole. Gotta win, 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 win this game and we'll run down and make those goals. For FSU is on the warpath now and at the battles and she's great. So fight, 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 to victory on Seminoles from Florida State.
With that, FSU's birthday party was underway. And what kind of a party would it be without music and ice cream and entertainment?
I came out here just so I could dunk my director. I had a great time and everything was real nice, and I was just looking forward to this year. I don't know if I have a job Monday, but
It was a warm day, filled with warm sights and sounds. Friends, students, and alumni, old and young, reveling in the success of a university whose rise to excellence may very well be unprecedented in American higher education.
I've always been proud of Florida State University. I mean, when you look at the academic credentials and the athletic reputation, it's just a wonderful place to be part of.
My grandma was in Alpha Chi Omega like a long time ago, and she said there were only, I think, like 10 girls or something in it. And I mean, our sorority has about 160 a lot. Yeah, so it's grown.
It made me think back to my years at Florida State. It made me think back to what made me decide to come here, and it made you think of the deep tradition that Florida State has. And in only 50 years, which is what we were celebrating, the 50 years of the name Florida State University, it made you go back to think about the people who were there before you and the things that we all do to make sure that the next person enjoys it as much as we have.